Welcome. We started with a fantastic keynote today morning, and one of the key takeaways that I had, amongst a lot of other takeaways that I took from the keynote today, was the terms that he used around being a climber, being a camper, and being a quitter. I want you to spend no more than a minute to just reflect on what kind of a climber you are. What is the question that drives you at your workplace? Take a moment to write it down somewhere, because you're going to need it at the end of the talk. You don't have to share it. It's your own personal reflection activity for a short minute. Welcome.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, I'll repeat it for the benefit of the ladies that just walked in. I'm asking you all to capture a short question that drove you to this session. What makes you a climber, going back to the vocabulary that we heard at the keynote today about climbers, about campers, and about quitters? What helps you to climb at your workplace? What is the question that drives you forward? And if you can write it down, perfect. If not, we'll move on, and it'll all make sense later as we go through this particular talk. Hi, I'm Dhaval Panchal. I'm here because I want to share how to think in systems. Systems thinking is a very vast field, so I'm only going to do an introductory talk. Hopefully, we'll work on your intuition and then work on techniques and vocabulary and things to look for. I have a monthly newsletter that goes out. Throughout the talk, at different points in time, you'll see a QR code. You can use your camera to sign up for the newsletter, and I'll make sure you get a copy of the slide deck that I've used over here. Scrum Alliance will also have it. And it's just a way for me to stay connected with you and collect your impressions and thoughts from this particular talk. All beginnings have a beginning. And here we're going to start with our understanding on systems from an intuitive level. What makes a system that it is not a collection? What you're seeing in the image are the parts of a motorcycle. When they are all taken apart and put together, it's a collection. I take one part away, it doesn't alter the system. But once I put it together in a specific order, in a specific manner, it can give rise to a vehicle that can transport you and bring a smile on your face when you drive it. And that's what a system is. A system is a specific arrangement of parts towards some goal. We have a variety of systems. One of the systems that we have is our circulatory system. It helps us to circulate oxygen and nutrients through our blood. We've got the respiratory system that intakes oxygen, and then it fills it into our blood system, and then it goes and does all the good stuff. If my goal is to exercise, my circulatory system and my respiratory system need to work in concert, because if they don't, it's going to not be a good activity. Do this for me. Close your eyes. Now open it, yeah? Now, stop your heartbeat. You see the difference? Some systems are voluntary, others are involuntary. The whole that makes the organism or the system, in this case, a human being, has some control over voluntary systems, and then there are some involuntary systems that will not shut down based on your desire to do so. A key point to understand that systems have subsystems. Subsystems cannot exist in isolation. In other words, you cannot make just the lungs and everything else exist on its own. You might be able to build a mechanical lung, but that is not going to survive without any other support that it needs, like electricity and whatnot. But you can take a human being, and that person can survive. It does not require electricity to survive. Similarly, in our organizations, we have the larger organization, which has its own goal, its own purpose, and then there are subsystems within the organization. These subsystems are financial systems, your research and development department, your production, your HR, your sales. All of these subsystems cannot exist on their own. They need to exist in cohort with other subsystems inside your organization. So as an organization, you can achieve some goal, whatever the goal for your org is. It is mind-blowing. There is a human as a system. There is a family as a system. There is a community as a system. There is a train station as a system. There is a society as a system. Systems are inside systems, and they are everywhere, which makes it extremely difficult to try to make sense out of what's actually going on. To simplify, what you want to understand is there is never a single cause for a single effect, predominantly. Yeah? Now, what that means is causes create effects, and effects can be a result of multiple causes, which in and of itself will create new effects that may come back and influence a cause to then drive up the next effect. So a key point to understand about systems is when we talk about systems, we are essentially talking about an artificial boundary in order to make sense of the system, because the system as a whole is intertwined and fully interconnected. You might think that you are part of an organization and it is not interconnected with other organizations, but then there could be an event that will tie the entire globe together. We had that case happen with the corona pandemic. It was not something that happened in one organization, but it happened and it affected every one of us. In other words, there was a cause and a ripple effect of that cause implied by the degree of connectivity that we have, the speed at which people could travel from point A to point B, cut across the whole globe, meant that the virus traveled really, really fast too. Systems have relationships both within and external to it. I guess where I'm trying to get to is when one tugs at a single thing, it starts to unravel other parts of the system. The key point here is to recognize that there is no right starting point. You could start at any level, at any place, and you pull on that thread, you're going to unravel a lot of the rest of the organization and maybe something else with it. Too often times, we spend a significant amount of time to say, what is the best place to do something? Well, the answer to that is you. And after that, pick anything. Because if you got centered on what you want to do, the rest of it will reveal itself as you play with this system. A thing to recognize about systems is systems grow and collapse all the time. Here, I'm trying to show you the scale at which it works. This is a graph of human civilization, different value systems. Let me kind of ask you one thing. How many of you value the ability to close the door at night and go to sleep? Almost everyone, yeah? There were cultures that didn't have that value. They had a totally different value, where there was no mine or yours. In fact, it could not be owned. You see, systems come and systems go. One of the systems that I really like that we are actually experiencing today is the thread that you all are carrying around. You all have knots on your thread? Yeah? Now, when you tie a knot on a thread, what does that mean? What did the opening keynote section talk about? When do you tie a knot? When you make a new connection, right? So I walked around asking people, is there a pattern to your knot tying? Yeah? Because I am following a pattern, and I am following that pattern after a while, because after the first 3 or 4 knots, I'm like, who is this? Is this cinnamon or is this cinnamon? You know? Because I've met people, and I've had connections. So what I did was I started tying knots closer together when I meet a group of people from the same company. That tells me this is Costco. Now, I thought I had it figured out, and now everyone should follow this system. But before I do that, I went on and talked to a friend over here, right? And when I asked him, what is your pattern? His preference is to tie knots at the exact same distance, just right. You see, now, whatever method, whatever mindset, whatever thinking that you are applying in whether you choose to tie a knot, or whether you actually tie a knot with some sequence, or is it just a random set of knots, that's the evidence you're leaving behind. Now, if I were to pull up this thread and try to decipher what actually was going on in your mind, it's going to be very, very hard. Which is what systems thinking becomes extremely complex, because there is no right answer. There is no one way of doing things. But there are many ways to do this. This system is actually pretty ancient. It comes from the Andean culture, where the term quipu, and I can't pronounce it correctly because I had to make that slide now and here, is a knot. This is from a culture that did not have writing, but they used to keep track of bookkeeping, stars, constellations, major events. They, in fact, invented or understood the concept of zero before they met Indians, right? Because we know zero better. I mean, like dots. Yeah. So here, like, you have a whole elaborate way of recording history, of recording transactions. Primarily, the purpose of knots was to make sure that there was bookkeeping happening. So you owe taxes in X number of whatever produce, and we're going to tie a knot a certain way to keep a track of it. That system has disappeared because of a variety of reasons. There are probably a handful of people who understand it. So here we are, trying to recreate something like this or totally different at the conference from first principles and ground up. And I think this is the state at which we find the agile industry today. There have been lessons, there has been wisdom that has been there, and now somehow, over time, we've kind of lost it, and now we are trying to build it all over again, which is why I'm really passionate about the topic of systems thinking, because it will help you to build your own systems. Because the state at which we can go and say everyone should do this is not yet there. We're going to look at systems from a building blocks standpoint. Before I talk more about how you could apply it in your world of work, I want to make sure we have some basic building blocks in place. The first building block is that of feedback. Feedback is return of information. If I go to a doctor's appointment and they take a rubber hammer and hit me on my knee will reflex. I don't get to choose. It just happens. When I go and tell a bad news to my manager and the manager jumps to conclusion and yells at me, that's a reflex. I wish the manager could actually choose the kind of response they would give, but if they had empathy for my situation, they'd probably at least think a second and say, maybe I shouldn't jump to conclusions. I should think about it. I could react to it after I understand a little bit of information. I could craft a response after I do some digging, or I could take my time, process it, and then reply at some point in time. The feedback mechanism is a primary test of what you are sensitive to. If you're not sensitive to it, you will not provide or register that piece of information coming back to you. It will just happen and you would not know it. The next topic is to understand the notion of reinforcing loops. In the concept of reinforcing loops, the more you have, the more you get. If you paid attention in high school elementary math and you understand compound interest, that's what happens. You have a principal, you collect interest, it goes to the principal again, you get a bigger interest, and over time, it becomes bigger and bigger. This is often the case where you will see loops being formed, vicious loops or virtuous loops. In other words, some things like addictions become vicious loops that end up with the system collapsing, the system in this case being the individual, whereas a virtuous loop will lead someone to a different place. Every system, whether it's a human, it's a team, it's an organization, whether it is a city, has some goal. This goal may be explicit or implicit, but there are balancing elements within the system that try to keep it at a stasis. Oftentimes for people, the stasis is because I have a specific interest in achieving a particular goal, or I am stubborn about not changing. Whatever it is, that is the goal that is going to direct how you're going to balance what you do in order to not move away from where you are at. The last concept is the notion of leverage. The notion of leverage comes from Archimedes, at least that's the earliest person I can quote, who said, if you give me a lever long enough and give me a place to put it, I can move the world. The idea behind leverage is if we can play with systems, if we can understand how to dance with them, then we can find small areas of changes that can give a significantly bigger impact in the total change happening inside the system. At its core, what systems thinking is doing is it is helping you to look at what is going on around you and asking you to pause. What we often talk about when we talk about systems thinking is to use the metaphor of an iceberg. There are events that happen. when events unfold, I can either respond to the event that is occurring, or I can give myself some time to see what kind of pattern emerges, and based on the detection of the pattern, create an adaptive response to it. What is never going to be clear is what is the structure within which that pattern emerges from and the events that unfold. To bring that to a more concrete example, if you look at the threads that you are all holding, and I don't have it. Yeah, it's right here. If I didn't tell you the 4 knots that are together represent a group of people that I met at the same time, you'd be free to draw any conclusion from that pattern. Yeah? In other words, it is very easy to fall prey to false patterns, to look at a set of things and say, aha, this means your future is bright. Humans have done that for the longest of times, looking at chicken entrails and all sorts of other tea leaves to predict the future, because they are trying to do something else. To truly understand what is the pattern in your knot, you'll have to talk to the system. You have to talk to the person, and they might say it's all just random, and that is a reasonable response. But if you don't know it's just random, you will draw conclusions based on false patterns. Unfortunately, a system will never reveal its structure. But what it will reveal is the evidence that it will leave behind. That evidence will show up as your dashboard metrics. That evidence will show up as stories you tell to each other. Be careful of that department. Let me tell you a story about it. I don't know what exactly is going on, but there is something to be aware of. You see? And that's the challenge with systems thinking, is unless we grasp at this structure, which is not going to reveal itself to you or anybody else, we are not able to make a concrete action that is going to be fruitful, which is why experimentation becomes the core of how we engage with systems. Because if I know I do X and I get Y, why would I bother doing an experiment? It's just a total waste of time. But I don't know what is actually going to happen, so I have to test my understanding and see if that informs what I'm going to do next. With this basics in place, let's look at the events, behavior, and structure, and now we'll go very practical after this. Yeah? So if your head is spinning by now, you're at the right place. So let's say there is an event. There is a fire that occurs in some part of the city. You would expect the fire department to respond to that event, and the kind of things they would look for is how quickly we detected a fire, how quickly we were able to get there and put the fire out. Now, if I am a mayor for a city, and I notice, in that neighborhood there's a whole bunch of fires occurring, and I've observed that data over a long period of time, I'd say, I should put a fire department right there. So it's not a long drive, it's an easier access for my fire engines to put the fire out. Now, a structural response would be based on asking intelligent questions. There is no prescription to what that question is, but perhaps one question is, why do we have more fires here and not over there? Is there a canned answer for that? No. You'll have to engage with that specific problem there. You can't go to a book to find out why that neighborhood in Portland or wherever is having more fires. You'll have to engage with that problem firsthand. Here in our organizations, we see similar parallels. When there is a bug, someone escalates, we go fix it. It's a reactive response. When I see there's a lot of issues, we'll intentionally release our products into hypercare, which means everyone just stop doing anything, be on station, because what we release is not going to work. Okay? And we institutionalize this process. It becomes the norm. Every year we release stuff, then for 2 months we wait for it to break, and people stop complaining, then we will do the same thing again, and hopefully this time it won't happen. An intelligent question, a structural question would be to ask, why do we have to do hypercare? Why can't we just ship on a Friday at 5 p.m. and then go have fun with our families on the weekend? That would be an interesting question to answer in our organizations. Now, understanding systems at play is a very challenging topic. Part of it is because you don't get to see the whole system. Even when you're interacting with another person, you don't understand the history, the culture, the beliefs that that person is bringing in. So you're kind of playing out how it's going to unfold. Here, in understanding systems at play for our organizations, we're going to look at 3 techniques. The first technique is called containers and exchanges. Think of containers as boxes. Yeah? Individuals in organizations reside in multiple containers. One container could be all of us report to the same boss. That's a container. All of us work in a team. That is a different container. As a part of a container, I exchange some information with another container. As a group of people who report to the same boss, we all engage in one-on-one at separate times, exchanging how we are doing and what our boss expects us to do. That's an exchange happening between 2 containers. Are you guys with me so far? Okay, so what we could do is we could model how it works out. Here, in this particular example, the situation that is unfolding is that the product owner does not have time to attend refinement and planning sessions. Now, when I encountered this situation, I said, okay, Ed, let's see what we can understand about where you are at and what your situation is. Because I could have easily said, the Scrum Guide says, and then that conversation would have gone nowhere. So I said, okay, let's look at your calendar. We're going to draw different containers that you exchange information with. What are those containers? And let's look at our calendar for a month. It gives us enough of a window to understand all the different groups that they are interacting with and what they are exchanging. Based on this, what we learned that the PO has 16 plus meetings, and they have to provide information to different parts of the organization about a very important project that they're working on. The underlying structure is that we are a IT department that is managed by a PMO with different architectural silos and groups that have their own needs to make sure that this project is a success. So if I were to engage in this environment or in this context, what could I do? A reactive response is a product owner says, I'm on a very important project. Important people are asking for important information, so I'm going to take care of important stuff, and hopefully my team will have enough knowledge to actually go and proceed. I am being reactive, and I'm trying to make sure I don't get into trouble for not being in an important meeting with an important person. Alternative 2, which is an adaptive response. You look at all the meetings that the product owner has to attend to, and then you say, okay, let's find a sliver of time that no one has booked for and book the product owner with the team for the whole year. At least that way, no one can book that time again in the future. Now, the question that you could ask over here is, how do we enable true product ownership? Because if you ask the question of how do I make the product owner and everybody else work well together, I will get a different response. But if I ask the question, how do I enable true product ownership? And this is a solution that came in that context, so I do not want to sell it as a best practice. It may not work. You'll have to ask a different question that suits your environment and arrive at your own answer. But in this context, the answer was to have a project manager who had worked with the product owner. They were good friends, and they both buddied up. You take care of all the useless reporting, because I don't have the energy to fight that, but I'll have the energy to build a great product, and then we'll see what happens. So far with me? Okay. Let's look at another technique. Now, in systems thinking, stocks and flows, they represent a flow of information, flow of artifacts, flow of things. And oftentimes, these things will accumulate in pools, in puddles, in ponds. Yeah? So if you look at the water system flows, and then it accumulates at certain places. So one way to understand this is to look at how backlogs work. If I were to draw a parallel, a backlog is a pond. It's a stock. It's a tank. It holds stuff. So far with me? Yep. So it holds things in it, and then when it is ready to be taken by the next group, they'll take it, they'll do the work, and it might go and be held in another place. Then it'll wait, and then it will be held in another place until finally something will be delivered to our customer. So I could say on 1st of January, we had this idea of what we want to do in our organization. It made its way into a backlog. And after 2 months in March, someone did market validation. They worked on it for a month. Then it sat in the next queue for another instead of 2 to 3 months. Someone else did the next step, then it waited, and then finally we were able to release something to our customers in December 31st, yeah? So the total time it took us was 12 months. The actual time we worked on it was 3 months. Now I can say, the overall efficiency of this process is 3 by 12. A rule of thumb, wherever there is a backlog, there is a wait period. They both come together. You don't get to choose, okay? Do you see that dynamic occurring when you fly from point A to point B? The actual time it takes to actually do the work of going through security, making sure you get your bags checked in and boarding the plane, maybe 30 minutes, but you have to arrive at least 90 minutes before. If you're me, extra cautious, 2 hours before. So everyone has like different sensitivity of how much they can tolerate, but it is definitely not exactly 30 minutes that it's going to take you to go from one place to another. Another way of organizing these backlogs or stocks is to parallelize it. In a common system that you see parallel backlogs exist is when you have multiple teams, typically component teams who have their own backlogs, and these teams will work on something, and then they will hand off the next set of activities to be done by another team. A challenge that occurs when you have multiple backlogs that are in parallel, that a single user request is now split into at least 3 items for 3 different component teams, plus at least 2 coordination items to manage the integration. So what you will find is that a request for the end user is multiplied by 5. So if your user wanted, say, 10 things, the number of backlogs in your organizational system will be at least 50, which now means I need 10 people to hold meetings about that and discuss and how it's going to go, right? So you can see how when I have work and the way it is organized, it is going to create work on its own. So far, so good? Okay, so let's look at what we can do. Because as a concept, this is basic queue theory. It has no feelings to it. You see, because backlogs come with wait periods. Backlogs come with the shadow of wait. It just is. In this particular picture, what you're seeing is a network of backlogs. And here, the context is a retail organization that sells stuff in a store. Then it also sells stuff online. There are people in the merchandising group looking at what vendors have, what deals they bring, how are we going to put that product up on the page. There is a season for something happening, so I need to make sure the product shows up on the page at the season because we are running a marketing campaign. You see typical retail e-commerce work. What you see here in this picture are a set of backlogs that are feeding each other. What was happening in this organization was the stakeholders were waiting, and because they did not know where their item is or what is going on with that particular item, they would escalate it, and that escalation would drive completion of that item until somebody else gets upset, and then their escalation will drive. What people learned in this system was you need to chirp louder than other people who are also chirping. So you end up with cacophony, you don't end up with a beautiful songbird music, yeah? Unfortunately, the organizational chirping doesn't lead to harmony. It always leads to some degree of frustration within the org. Now here, what pattern we detected is we essentially asked everyone to make a list of all the places that they keep their backlogs at. Different departments, different groups. Some people maintain it in Jira, other people email it to other people. There is a set of items that are maintained in an Excel spreadsheet. They are going from one department to another department. They are processing it, and then they are pushing the next item to the next place. As a result, what you see is there are 11 backlogs that are generating new work and about 5 backlogs that are aggregating this work. Right? That's a structural analysis that you can do simply looking at the flow of backlog items. What you find here is that an event or a reactive-based response is you have a product owner who plays whack-a-mole really well. Right? They know when an issue occurs, solve that issue for that thing, go to the next person, and we will call them a very productive, busy person. You know, they know how to work in this culture. Yeah? A pattern response would be to say, let's do something called as a big room planning. We'll get all our stakeholders together in the same room like this. We will plan for the whole of 3 months. And as a consequence, we will not be able to make a change for at least 3 months. So even though in systems language this would be an adaptive response, it is not technically an agile or an adaptive response because you are limiting what can be changed for the 3-month window that you are at. The questions this group asked is, where do ideas go to die? This was the question that they asked based on looking at their backlogs. Another question looks at, if this is complex, what might make it simpler? Yeah, the answer that they arrived at was to say, we should probably have an idea of what product are we building. We need to have a goal for our product, because then that will help us to understand what backlogs exist and how we need to manage the flow of backlogs and the items through it. The last one is causal loop diagramming. And here what you see is an archetype for fixes that fail. When there is a problem, we apply a fix. When you apply a fix, the problem alleviates a little bit, but over time, the fix becomes the problem because it leads to unintended consequences that makes the problem even worse. In organizations, it helps if you can understand your problem by modeling together with the people who are involved in the organizational change. The notion here is to have a conversation about how we got here. How did you decide the pattern of knots that you were going to use? Is there a better way of doing this? Let's build that shared understanding first before we start tinkering with the system. Because at least then we will know when we change something whether it actually helped or not. A thing that is occurring today is oftentimes organizations decide we are going to go agile. And because agile is viewed as a new set of vocabulary, a reactive response to it is, how can we send everybody to an agile training? Because when everybody will give the right definition of velocity, we will have better products. A pattern-based response is to say, you know, in the larger context, we've seen agile to be successful. I'm detecting a pattern. Agile is associated with success, so therefore I need to apply agile in my organization, and we are going to use a pattern called rolling teams in order to roll it out. What is also happening at a structural level, as far as I can understand, is the mindset of the workers today has changed completely. People want more autonomy, they want more connection with the kind of work that they do and the organizations that they work for. So a creative response here would be to have the leaders engage in the conversation about what type of an agile organization we want to be. That is going to require capacity within the group to hold dialogue. And the only way you can hold meaningful dialogue is by modeling together. It is almost as if you're looking at a pane of glass that is hazy, where you can just see the shape of the problem, but you don't have to get it in HD resolution to hold a conversation and then decide what is the next step we are going to take together as the larger organizational leadership team. And that's the intent with causal loop diagramming and how it can influence what you try to do. Beliefs are axioms that we take to be true on faith. In fact, if you don't have beliefs, you will not be able to act. You'll just find so much information and you will not know how to make sense of it to do something from it. In human systems, in people systems, confirmation bias is everywhere. Confirmation bias is about cherry-picking information from what is occurring in front of you to only pick the information that fits with what you already know. And our human system will react emotionally to a new piece of information that does not confirm with our beliefs. And it is extremely uncomfortable. This is the time when you are, I want to get out of my chair and tell that guy he doesn't know anything. There is some piece of information that is coming out that is completely opposite to how you think, how you look at the world of work, and that first reaction is going to be an emotional response. When we talk about leadership, the first act of leadership is being able to control and manage your own emotions. Because if that is not feasible, you're not going to be able to lead responsibly. I mean, there have been very chaotic dictators out in the world, but it doesn't work out in the long run for the people in the society that they lead. In her essay, Donella Meadows, I would strongly recommend, if you want to look at a book, search for a book that is written by her. She talks about 12 points of leverage. The easiest point of leverage to access within organizations is to set measures and metrics as targets. And when these measures and metrics are set as targets, the system will show some change, but over time it will revert back to where it was before. A better leverage point is to build negative feedback loops, or in simpler terms, build skin in the game. One of the fantastic things that I saw occur recently, I grew up in India. We are not known for road safety or rail safety. In fact, rails have often accidents. They are now trying to build a high-speed rail system. The test for that high-speed rail system was to see if two trains are on the same track, are they going to collide or not? So they built a system that would prevent them from colliding. The first public test had on one train the national minister of railway, and on another train, a person who was the chief engineer of that system. Both trains were sent to come, and the proof was that it is going to actually stop. You don't put skin in the game, you don't get results. I don't care what you talk about and how much you kind of, dance around it. You want results, you put skin in the game. You build that negative feedback loop, because that will change the mindset. Everything else is going to be a song and dance. Because we tend to see a problem only from our perspective. This is the challenge with confirmation bias. In our teams, in our organizations, everyone sees a portion of the problem. The story of the elephant and the seven blind men is about each thinking that they understand what the problem is, but it is a rope. No, it's a fan. No, it's a trunk. There's a whole another problem that is out there that we don't understand because we don't talk to each other. We don't talk to each other in the context of the problems we are facing. We talk to each other in labels. We talk to each other in frameworks, but we don't talk about the problem that is there. If you don't do that, you're only going to talk in abstraction. Here's your dance floor, right? As organizational leaders, you're dancing with people who have their own identity, their own habits, their own competency, their own needs, their aspirations, their fears, their values, their preferences, their biases. You're working with a team that has its own mission, its own processes. You're working within an organization which has its own systems that reinforce a kind of behavior, its own legacy and culture that dictates what works, what doesn't work. In this type of an environment, as a leader, you have to learn to let go. To say there will be a point where I will understand everybody in my team, everyone who I work with, and my whole organization, and then I will make the best possible choice is not a good move. A better move is to see if I can dance with it and enjoy it. I guess the best test of knowing whether your organization is going to succeed with an agile transformation is whether people have a sense of humor. Because if they don't, it's not going to work out. It's all going to be stuffy, bureaucratic nonsense, and people will play along, but nothing really will change because no one's ready to dance. Everyone's ready to take a step-by-step instruction from someone to become autonomous. I mean, come on. We need to let go of all of these canned recipes and find joy in getting back into the playing field to see how it unfolds and see if that is something that we can shape or influence based on empathy, based on the understanding of the people that we work with. The tools and techniques and the methods and procedures and all of that, they will come and go. These are all different kinds of mirrors we use to see what next we should do. But the person is in front of you. Deal with that. Oftentimes we believe that if we can prescribe a set of actions, results will come. But what really drives results is the experience people will have when they go through something. That something could be a ride on a theme park. That something could be an agile transformation. If people have a positive experience participating in sprint planning, they have a positive experience prioritizing their backlog, if they have a positive experience planning and testing and meeting the definition of done, they are going to alter their belief and they will decide what's the next best thing to do. But if their experience is negative, their belief is never going to change. So when you lead in your organizations, if there's one takeaway that you could take from this talk, is try not to emphasize doing it the right or the wrong way. Focus on whether they are having a positive experience or a negative experience. So what, the backlog is not perfectly prioritized. We will get there. But are you enjoying the process right now? Because if you're not, it's not going to work. It all starts by the question you're trying to ask. I'm going to ask you now a second question. Now that you've participated in this talk, I'd like you to take a minute, reflect on the question you have, and see if you want to change your question. I'll only answer the questions that are a different question than the first one that you have. A bit about me, and then we'll do the Q&A for remaining time, and I'll walk out to make room for the next speaker, but I'm interested in what you have to talk to me outside the session as well. I do lead a lot of, we do lead trainings. We approach the world of work from a systems viewpoint. It will not be sufficient for me to describe all of this, so please take a look at evolveagility.com. You'll find a lot of approaches of how we look at the world of work and how we shape or aim to shape it and then influence it. Again, if you want to sign up for my newsletter, a non-boring newsletter, you can unsubscribe anytime. Use the QR code. I do want to take now a couple of questions if someone has, because it will help us. Yes.
In your experience, what do you think is keeping people from getting to the creative solutions?
Fear. I think everyone is inherently creative. People that often describe themselves, and you'll see that, like, oh, I'm not creative. They are, because they show that creativity in other areas of their life. They may not be creative when they are doing financial bookkeeping, which is a good thing, right? But they probably have a hobby where they are creative. So oftentimes people build identities as prisons. So when you ask yourself a question, always ask an open-ended, positive, forward-looking question. In other words, ask yourself how I can be more creative, not why am I not creative. Because the path, why am I not creative, will only lead to more justification because of your confirmation bias. But if you were to ask the question, how can I be creative, there's a whole universe of how you can be. So pay attention to that internal narrative that you have, or whoever has, right? Yes, sir.
I think many of us, we use root cause analysis techniques to
yes.
root causes. Obviously, this is a very linear approach.
Correct.
Systems thinking is about loops. So how do you look at this?
Right.
Analysis?
So if you look at root cause analysis, it never says that the root cause is what you have discovered. It only says that you have now, for example, the technique of 5 whys is to help the conversation go beyond the surface level event to then see if there is a pattern and maybe grasp at the structure. And what you do is you intervene with a countermeasure. That's the formal language that you use. You don't say we are fixing the root cause, you're saying we are applying a countermeasure. And then we'll see what happens to the system when we apply the countermeasure, because we may not have understood. So we don't want to apply a whole bunch of countermeasures and make the whole company agile, because that will throw everything off the rails. So you'd say, okay, what simple area we can apply a countermeasure, see if it works, and then see if that reveals more of the system structure to make a better experiment, to make a better informed next step.
So it's more like finding good experiments rather than solving the problem.
You will never solve the problem. Here's the challenge, that oftentimes we have this fantasy of a utopia. Today's keynote, if there was another key takeaway, is that everybody has a problem. It is your attitude with that problem that matters more than what problems you have. As an organization, you might have a class of problems. Oh, he doesn't talk to me. When you learn how to be trust-based, collaborative organization, I hope your class of problem changes to how do we build the most awesome thing for our customer. Problems will always be there. It's just the dragons you slay are going to be different. I hope they are like worthy dragons to fight. Because if we are still stuck on, I don't know if I can get along, then we are still at a very low level problem solving. Well, thank you so much for coming for my talk.